The car rumbled, a familiar drone against the backdrop of an increasingly desolate landscape. Elara watched the last vestiges of civilization recede in the rearview mirror, replaced by ancient, gnarled trees and an oppressive silence that pressed in from all sides. Michael, her husband, gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, a nervous energy radiating from him that contradicted his usual calm demeanor. Beside her, Lily, their youngest, was uncharacteristically quiet, her face pressed against the window, while Ethan, ever the cynic, had his headphones on, a silent protest against their forced relocation. The House of Echoes. The name itself had held a morbid fascination, a whisper of something ancient and forgotten. But seeing it now, rising from the mist-shrouded hills like a skeletal sentinel, the fascination curdled into a cold dread. It was a monolith of dark, weathered stone, its windows like vacant eyes staring out from beneath heavy, moss-laden brows. A winding, overgrown driveway, more a suggestion than a path, led them to its imposing, wrought iron gates, rusted shut like a forgotten law. Michael wrestled with the ancient lock, his grunts amplified by the unnerving quiet that seemed to swallow even the chirping of distant birds. The gates groaned open, a sound that Elara swore was less metal on metal and more tortured sigh. The air inside the house was thick, a heavy cloak of dust and an indescribable scent. Mildew, decay, and something else, something metallic and sharp like old blood. As Michael pushed open the massive oak door, it didn't creak. It moaned a long, drawn-out wail that seemed to vibrate through Elara's very bones. The sound didn't dissipate as it should have. Instead, it coiled back, wrapping around itself, echoing not just from the empty halls but from within her own skull, distorted and prolonged. Lily, clutching her worn teddy bear, took a tentative step inside. Her small shoes scuffed against the marble floor, a faint sound that instantly exploded into a cacophony. It wasn't just amplified, it was transformed. The gentle scuff became a grating roar, like stones grinding together, then elongated into a series of sharp, metallic clangs, as if a giant had dropped 1,000 swords. Lily flinched, tears welling in her eyes. "Mommy, what was that?" she whispered, her voice surprisingly clear. Yet even her whisper seemed to carry an unnerving resonance, a faint, ghostly hum that trailed off into the cavernous silence. "It's just the acoustics, sweetie," Michael said, his voice attempting a cheerful note that fell flat, his words also slightly off-key, as if spoken through a broken speaker. He tried to reassure her, but his own movements, the clink of his keys as he placed them on a dusty console, resulted in a series of bell-like tolls that lingered far too long, each note vibrating with an unsettling, disharmonious quality. Elara moved further into the grand foyer. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light filtering through grimy, leaded glass windows, giving the air a shimmering, almost viscous quality. The silence, when it returned, was not empty but heavy, pregnant with unspoken sounds, a constant thrumming beneath the surface. Every step she took, every breath she drew, seemed to generate a small, internal echo that resonated within her, a phantom vibration. It was as if the house itself was a giant, warped ear, catching every minuscule sound and twisting it into a perverse symphony. The house felt immense, a labyrinth of shadows and forgotten grandeur. They moved from the foyer into a vast living room, where tattered drapes hung like skeletal shrouds and dust sheets covered spectral furniture. Here, the subtle shifts in her family began. Michael, usually meticulously organized, began unpacking boxes with an almost frantic energy, yet he kept placing items in illogical places. A stack of books in the kitchen utensils in the study. When Elara pointed it out, he merely blinked, a vacant look in his eyes, and muttered, "It felt right there." His voice seemed to have lost some of its usual warmth, acquiring a flat, almost monotonous quality. Ethan, who had initially scoffed at the creepy old mansion, found himself drawn to the decaying grand piano in the corner of the living room. He ran a finger over its yellow keys, and the faint, melancholic note that emerged wasn't a piano sound at all, but a deep, resonant hum, like a distant ship's horn, followed by a series of high-pitched, almost human-like keening sounds that faded slowly, painfully. Ethan, instead of recoiling, seemed fascinated, a strange, almost obsessive glint in his eyes. He tried again, pressing a full chord, and the resulting cacophony was a symphony of dissonant screams and wails, a sound that made Elara's blood run cold. Yet, Ethan merely smiled, a faint, unsettling curve of his lips, and pressed the keys again, as if trying to replicate the horrifying sound. Lily, usually boisterous and full of questions, had become eerily quiet. She sat in a dusty armchair, clutching her teddy bear tightly, her eyes wide and fixed on nothing in particular. When Elara tried to engage her, Lily would respond with single, non-committal words, her voice tiny and far away, as if she was speaking from great distance. Her usual cheerful giggles were replaced by a soft, almost imperceptible humming, a tuneless, repetitive drone that seemed to emanate from the very air around her. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it sent a shiver down Elara's spine. It was the sound of a child lost in a world only she could perceive. Elara found herself constantly listening, straining to decipher the bizarre auditory landscape of their new home. The house hummed with a low, constant vibration that she couldn't quite pinpoint, a feeling more than a sound, like a massive, dormant beast breathing around them. The floorboards creaked with an exaggerated groan, even when no one walked on them. A distant drip of water from an unseen leak echoed like a persistent, rhythmic thud of a heart. Every mundane noise was rendered grotesque, alien. She tried to rationalize it, attributing it to the house's age, its vastness, the unique acoustics of a place so long abandoned. But deep down, a primal unease gnawed at her. This wasn't just old house creaks. This was something active, something intelligent, manipulating sound, bending reality to its whim. The distortions were not random. They felt deliberate, almost taunting, as the first evening descended, bringing with it a deeper, more profound darkness within the house. The strangeness intensified. The wind outside, instead of whistling, seemed to whisper names, long, drawn-out syllables that resonated in the empty chimneys. The silence between the bizarre sounds was almost more terrifying, a vacuum that felt heavy with unseen presences. Elara watched her family, each of them increasingly enveloped in their own strange, silent worlds. Michael, now arranging furniture with an unsettling precision, would occasionally pause, listening intently to something Elara couldn't hear, a faint smile playing on his lips. Ethan, still at the piano, was no longer pressing keys, but simply hovering his hands over them, as if conducting an invisible orchestra of wails and groans that only he could perceive. And Lily, still in the armchair, had begun to rock slowly, humming her tuneless drone, her eyes now wide, staring at the dust motes as if they were constellations. Elara felt a growing sense of isolation, a chilling realization that she was the only one who seemed to perceive the true horror unfolding around them. The house wasn't just distorting sounds, it was twisting minds subtly, insidiously. She called out to Michael, her voice sounding thin and reedy in the immense space. "Michael, don't you hear it? All these sounds, they're not right." Michael turned slowly, his eyes unfocused, a faint, almost pitying smile on his face. "Hear what, Elara? It's just the old house settling. You're tired. Come, help me with these boxes." His voice was flat, devoid of its usual warmth, and the simple words seemed to echo, not just from the walls, but from a great, unfeeling void. Elara, he shivered, a cold dread seeping in her bones. The house was not just making sounds, it was making them deaf, making them blind to the true nature of their new home. She was beginning to understand that the house's strange noises weren't just background ambience. They were a prelude, a subtle, insidious poison seeping into the very fabric of their minds. And the worst part, she was powerless to stop it, caught in a symphony of madness that was only just beginning. The true horror wasn't just the distorted sounds. It was the way they were becoming part of her family, twisting them into strangers she barely recognized. The house was speaking, and her family was beginning to listen, not to her, but to its chilling whispers. The first dawn in the House of Echoes brought no solace. Instead, it merely illuminated the deepening cracks in their reality, casting long, distorted shadows across the gray and dusty rooms. Elara awoke from a fitful sleep, the strange, tuneless hum Lily had adopted still vibrating in her ears, a phantom echo of the night before. She found Michael in the vast, cold kitchen, meticulously arranging mismatched plates in stacks that defied gravity, his movements precise yet entirely nonsensical. He hummed a low, guttural tune as he worked, a sound that seemed to originate not from his throat but from the very walls around him, reverberating with a heavy, metallic clang that made Elara's teeth ache. "Michael," she began, her voice a fragile whisper against the house's constant throng. "We need to talk. This isn't right. The sounds, the way everyone is acting." He paused, a chipped teacup suspended precariously atop a stack of saucers. He turned, his eyes glazed, a faint, almost beatific smile on his lips. "Right? Of course it's right, Elara. Everything has its place and sound. Can't you hear it? The house it sings." His words, usually warm and reassuring, now carried a hollow resonance, as if spoken from a great distance, devoid of any genuine emotion. The teacup slipped from his grasp, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was not a sharp crack, but a drawn-out, splintering wail, like glass shards tearing through flesh, followed by a chorus of high-pitched shrieks that echoed and multiplied, swirling around them before dissipating into a low, mournful drone. Michael merely blinked, unperturbed, and bent to pick up the pieces, his fingers brushing the sharp edges without care. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't a Michael. This was a puppet, animated by some unseen force, echoing the house's distorted logic. She found Ethan in the living room, still at the decrepit piano. He wasn't playing notes, but running his palms over the keys, a frantic, almost desperate motion. The result was a chaotic symphony of groans, whistles, and the unmistakable sound of something heavy dragging across stone, interspersed with sharp, guttural coughs that seemed to come from directly beneath the floorboards. Ethan's face was pale, his eyes wide and fixed, a strange blend of fear and exhilaration twisting his features. "Ethan, stop it," Elara cried, her voice cracking. "What are you doing?" He looked up, his gaze distant, unfocused. "I'm listening, Mom. Can't you hear them? They're trying to tell me something. There's a pattern, a language. It's beautiful." His voice was thin, reedy, utterly unlike his usual sarcastic tone. As he spoke, his words seemed to stretch, each syllable elongated and distorted, like a record played at the wrong speed. The word beautiful resonated with a high-pitched, almost painful whine, lingering in air long after he had finished speaking. A cold dread coiled in Elara's stomach. The house wasn't just distorting sounds, it was distorting minds. It was twisting their perceptions, making them hear beauty and horror, order and chaos. She found Lily in the grand, empty ballroom, rocking slowly in the middle of the dust-laden floor. Lily was no longer humming. She was whispering, a soft, incessant stream of words that Elara couldn't quite decipher. Each whisper was accompanied by a faint, rustling sound, like dry leaves skittering across a vast, empty space. "Lily, what are you saying?" Elara knelt, trying to catch her daughter's eye. Lily looked at her, her eyes wide and dark, reflecting the gloomy light from the high windows. "They're talking to me, Mommy. They're sad. They want to play." Her voice was clear, but flat, devoid of a child's natural inflection. As she spoke, Elara distinctly heard a new sound, faint at first, then growing louder. A child's laughter, but it was hollow, brittle, and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing Lily's own words, twisting them into something sinister. It wasn't Lily's laughter. It was a ghost of laughter, a chilling echo from the past. Elara stood abruptly, a desperate need to escape seizing her. This wasn't a home. It was a mausoleum of sanity. She rushed to the front door, her mind screaming for fresh air, for the familiar sound of the outside world. She wrestled with the heavy iron bolt, her fingers fumbling, slick with sweat. As she pulled, the massive oak door groaned, a long, drawn-out cry that seemed to morph into a guttural whisper. Don't leave. The words were not distinct, not entirely formed, but the intent was unmistakable. They resonated not just from the door, but from the very air around her, from the floorboards beneath her feet, from within her own skull. It was a chorus of tormented voices, indistinct but unified, speaking through the house itself. She yanked harder, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. The bolt wouldn't budge. It was jammed, rusted solid, or perhaps simply unwilling. She stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. Michael, Ethan, we need to leave. The door is stuck. Michael, still in the kitchen, merely hummed his discordant tune, rearranging shattered pottery. Ethan continued to conduct his invisible orchestra of despair at the piano, a faint, unsettling smile on his lips. Lily, in the ballroom, continued her unsettling whispers, now accompanied by the faint, rhythmic creaking of a swing, as if an invisible child were playing beside her. Elara tried the windows. Each one was sealed shut, painted over, or simply too old and stiff to open. The glass, grimy and thick, seemed to absorb the outside light, turning the world beyond into a hazy, indistinguishable blur. As she pressed her hand against the pane, she heard a faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging on a wooden board, then a choked, raspy whisper. Trapped. Here, the warnings were becoming clearer, more desperate. She heard them in the distant drip of an unseen leak, now sounding like a hurried, rhythmic tapping. Hurry. Escape. The wind outside, when it howled through a broken pane upstairs, seemed to carry a chorus of elongated, ghostly moans that coalesced into distorted words. Listening, the horrifying truth began to dawn on her. The house was alive, but not in a comforting way. It was a sentient entity feeding on their sanity, twisting their perceptions. And the sounds, they weren't just random distortions. They were messages, desperate pleas, forming from the very fabric of the house, trying to warn her, not just of the house itself, but of what it did to those trapped within its walls. A chilling thought pierced her growing despair. If the house was speaking, and her family was listening, then what were they hearing? Were they hearing distorted warnings too, but interpreting them as something else? Or were they hearing something far more sinister, a siren song that drew them deeper into the house's maddening embrace? Elara found herself alone, truly alone, in a house that pulsed with malevolent intent. The distorted noises, the unsettling whispers, the phantom sounds were no longer just background noise. They were constant, suffocating presence, pressing in on her from all sides. She clutched her head, tried to block out the cacophony, but it was useless. The sounds were everywhere, and now they were beginning to form more coherent, more urgent phrases. A low, guttural growl emanated from the grand fireplace, twisting into words. Don't trust the house. It was followed by a faint, childlike whimper from the floorboards. Run. She is hungry. Elara's breath hitched. She wasn't just hearing echoes. She was hearing voices. Distorted, tormented, but unmistakably voices. They were trying to warn her, to break through the house's twisted symphony. But how? And what exactly were they warning her about? The house itself was something within it. The fear was no longer just a cold knot in her stomach. It was a burning, suffocating presence, pressing down on her, urging her to find a way out, even as the house itself seemed to mock her efforts, its very walls whispering, too late, too late. Elara's head swam with the cacophony, but her mind, paradoxically, felt sharper, more focused than ever. The whispers, too late, had ignited not just terror, but a desperate, burning need for understanding. She staggered through the vast, echoing halls, her own footsteps a thunderous, distorted march, her breath a ragged, amplified gasp that seemed to reverberate from the very air around her. The house was a living instrument of torment, a braying, malevolent organ, but now she knew it was also a prison where the condemned tried to cry out. She found herself in what appeared to be an old nursery, bathed in a murky, greenish light filtering through grimy, leaded glass panes. A chipped, wooden rocking horse stood in the corner, covered in a shroud of dust like a forgotten relic, its painted eyes vacant, staring into an unseen past. As Elara approached it, a faint, rhythmic creak began, not from the horse itself, but from the very fabric of the room, a sound that quickly intensified into the distinct, unnerving rhythm of a child's swing, slow and deliberate at first, then picking up a frantic, desperate pace. Then a small, fragile giggle, brittle and ancient, filled the room, chilling Elara to the bone. It was followed by the faint, almost imperceptible whisper, "Mama, worried." Elara froze, her blood turning to ice. This wasn't Lily's laughter, nor her whisper. This was a different voice, yet undeniably a child's, tinged with an unbearable sorrow. The sound was so raw, so full of longing, so utterly heartbroken. Her heart ached with a primal sorrow, a resonance with the spectral grief that permeated the very dust motes dancing in the air. She reached out, her hand hovering over the rocking horse, and as her fingers brushed the dusty, splintered wood, the creaking intensified, morphing into a desperate, frantic rocking, accompanied by the chilling sound of a child's small body hitting the floor, a soft, sickening thud, then a final, heartbroken sob that echoed endlessly, fading into a mournful drone. It was a memory, a death. This wasn't just distortion. It was a replay, a spectral recording of a tragic moment. The house was not merely echoing. It was reenacting, breathing life into forgotten agonies. And the voices, they were them, the ones who had died here. She stumbled back, a horrified gasp escaping her lips, which immediately reverberated as a mournful shriek throughout the house, a sound that tore her eardrums. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice a thin, greedy sound, yet it seemed to trigger a new wave of auditory phenomena. From the walls themselves, a chorus of faint, overlapping whispers began, like a distant, frantic murmur of a crowd trapped behind thick glass. They were indistinct at first, a jumble of tormented syllables, a cacophony of suffering, but as Elara strained to listen, they coalesced, focusing on her, pressing in on her from all sides. "Here, U.S. Warning, you." The words were ragged, torn, as if ripped from phantom throats, yet undeniably coherent. She pressed her hands to her ears, but the sounds were not external. They were inside her head, vibrating in her very bones, a constant, agonizing hum. She had to understand. She moved to the grand staircase, its banisters slick with years of accumulated dust. As she ascended, each creaking step seemed to pull a new, grotesque sound from the house's depths. A deep, hacking cough erupted from an upper landing, so visceral it made her gag, followed by a faint, metallic clatter and a guttural groan. Poison. Elara stopped dead, her blood running cold. The well. There was an old, overgrown well in the overgrown garden they had seen upon arrival, a dark, gaping maw hidden amongst tangled weeds. This was a specific, actionable warning, a piece of information from past, trying to prevent a future tragedy. She rushed to a grimy window, peering out into the mist-shrouded garden. The well was a dark, circular shadow amidst the tangled weeds, a silent sentinel. She continued her frantic exploration, no longer merely observing, but actively searching for the origins of the echoes, desperate for more clues. She found a dusty study, filled with forgotten tomes stacked precariously on collapsing shelves. As she ran her hand over a leather-bound book, its cover cracked and peeling, a soft, brittle rustling sound emerged, like old paper turning with frantic haste, followed by a rapid, frantic scratching, as if a pen were furiously writing against time. Then a deep, weary sigh, heavy with resignation, and a faint, desperate whisper. They know too much. Burn. Mighty. Oh, the smell of old parchment, mingled with a faint, acrid scent of ash, seemed to permeate the air, a phantom odor of destruction. This was a story, a fragment of a life, a moment of terror, a desperate attempt to erase a truth. Elara's mind raced, piecing together the grim mosaic. Each sound, each twisted echo, wasn't just a random distortion. It was a dying breath, a final scream, a desperate warning from someone who had met their end within these very walls. The house was a tomb, and the echoes were its condemned inhabitants, their suffering immortalized and replayed endlessly. A horrifying symphony of the damned, a new understanding, horrifying in its clarity, washed over her, chilling her to the marrow. The house wasn't just a place of death. It was a collector of final moments, a prison for lost souls, a macabre archive of their last agonies. And these souls, trapped in an eternal loop of their last sounds, were trying to communicate, trying to break through the house's malevolent hold, to save her from their fate, from becoming just another echo in its eternal chorus. She thought of Michael, arranging shattered pottery with vacant eyes, hearing a singing that was undoubtedly the echoes of a broken mind, a fragmented, insidious reality. She thought of Ethan, conducting his orchestra of despair at the piano, hearing beauty in the wails of the dead, in the final, agonizing sounds of past inhabitants, and Lily, rocking slowly in the ballroom, whispering to invisible playmates, listening to the hollow laughter of a lost child, perhaps the very child whose giggle she had just heard in the nursery. The house wasn't just distorting sounds for them. It was feeding them the very echoes of its victims, twisting those sounds into a new, insidious reality that pulled them deeper into its madness, making them complicit in their own demise. A wave of nausea washed over Elara, a cold, clammy dread. The terror was no longer abstract. It was personal, intimate. She was hearing their dying moments, witnessing their final agonies, and they were trying to give her a chance they never had. The house seemed to sense her breakthrough, her horrifying understanding. The sounds intensified, becoming a chaotic, deafening roar that vibrated through her teeth and bones. The child's sob from the nursery morphed into a piercing shriek that threatened to burst her eardrums. The hacking cough from upstairs became a frantic, choking gasp, as if a spectral presence was convulsing right beside her. The distant whispers solidified into a chorus of desperate pleas, all overlapping, all screaming the same fragmented words. Leave. U.S. Free. Don't. Become. U.S. The air grew heavy, thick with unseen presences, a suffocating weight. Shadows deepened, twisting into grotesque, fleeting shapes in her peripheral vision. The thrumming beneath the floorboards vibrated through her entire body, a malevolent pulse, the very heartbeat of the house. The house was fighting back, trying to drown out the warnings, trying to keep its new prey from escaping its grasp. She had to get out, not just for herself, but for her family, if there was any part of them left to save. The warnings were clear: don't become U.S. But the house was also clear: trapped here. A desperate resolve hardened in her eyes, burning with a fierce, primal instinct for survival. She ran, not towards the futile front door, but deeper into the house, following the faint, insistent tapping that had once sounded like a distant leak, but now seemed to guide her with a frantic urgency. Hurry, escape, basement. The sounds, now understood, were her only hope. The condemned souls, reaching out from their eternal torment, their final pleas echoing through the layers of time. The house, however, responded with a new, terrifying sound. The floorboards beneath her feet began to groan, not like old unsettling, but like something stretching, shifting, as if the very foundations of the house were moving slowly, inexorably, trying to seal her in, to make her journey to freedom an impossible, never-ending labyrinth. The echoes weren't just warnings. They were the soundtrack to her impending doom, a symphony of suffering that was about to claim its newest members. Elara stumbled down the servant staircase, its rotting with groaning under her weight, each step an amplified crack and splinter, echoing like breaking bones. The faint, insistent tapping of hurry, escape, basement had become a frantic, almost frantic drumbeat in her skull, guiding her through the deepening gloom. The air grew colder, heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and cloying like stagnant blood. The house itself seemed to resist her, the walls around her beginning to ripple and shift, not physically, but perceptually, as if the very dimensions of the corridor were warping around her, twisting her path, trying to disorient her. Distant thuds and groans resonated from unseen corners, sounding like immense, unseen machinery grinding to life, the very foundations of the house protesting her defiance. She found Michael in a dimly lit antechamber off the main hall, his back to her, meticulously polishing a tarnished silver candelabra with a grimy cloth. His low, guttural hum was louder now, a buzzing drone that seemed to vibrate the very air. As Elara approached, she heard it clearly, a faint, rhythmic clink accompanying his movements, not the candelabra, but a sound like shackles, chain on chain, faint and constant. "Michael," she gasped, her voice hoarse, a thin, desperate plea. It echoed back as a series of sharp, metallic snaps like bones breaking. He turned slowly, his eyes wide and vacant, reflecting the faint light from a single, grimy window like polished stones. A faint, almost beatific smile played on his lips, unsettling in its emptiness. "She's so beautiful when she hums, Elara," he murmured, his voice flat, devoid of his usual warmth, yet each word was drawn out, resonating with a hollow, bell-like quality. "Can't you hear her? She's telling me where everything belongs. The order, the perfect final order." He gestured vaguely at a wall where he had meticulously arranged a collection of rusted tools and broken crockery, each piece emitting a faint, high-pitched whine that only he seemed to hear. He was beyond saving, lost to the house's siren song, a mere conductor in its grotesque symphony. Elara backed away, her heart a cold knot in her chest. She found Ethan in what must have once been a library, vast and dark, filled with towering, empty bookshelves. He sat cross-legged on the floor, his eyes closed, his hands raised as if in supplication. The air around him shimmered with a cacophony of sound, whispers, shrieks, the distant clang of metal, the wet thud of something heavy hitting the floor. It was a maelstrom of sound, yet Ethan looked serene, a faint smile on his lips. "They're so loud now, Mom," he whispered, his voice ethereal, barely a breath, yet it carried an unnerving resonance like wind chimes made of ice. So many stories, so much truth. I could almost touch them, almost join them. As he spoke, a new sound emerged, a faint, rhythmic thump, 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 like a heartbeat, but too slow, too deep, emanating from Ethan himself, or perhaps from the floor beneath him. It was a sound of immense pressure, of something trying to break free. Elara reached for him, but he flinched away, his eyes snapping open, wide and unfocused, filled with a terrifying ecstasy. "Don't break the connection, Mom," he hissed, his voice a distorted echo of her own, a chilling mimicry. "They're showing me the way, the true way." She stumbled away, propelled by a primal terror. The house was not merely distorting them, it was consuming them, twisting their very essence, making them complicit in their own demise. Their minds were gone, replaced by the house's corrupted logic, their voices now part of its chorus of the damned. She had to find Lily. She had to. She found her daughter in a derelict conservatory, the glass panels broken, allowing the cold, damp air to seep in. Lily was standing perfectly still in the center of the room, her small figure dwarfed by the skeletal remains of dead plants. She wasn't humming, nor was she whispering. She was listening. Her head was cocked to one side, her eyes wide, fixed on a specific point in the grimy ceiling. From that spot, a faint, rhythmic snip, snip, snip emanated, like scissors cutting through fabric, followed by the soft, almost inaudible plink of something small hitting the stone floor. It was the sound of slow, deliberate dissection, chilling in its precision. "She's showing me her dolls, Mommy," Lily said, her voice clear, unerringly calm, but flat, devoid of any childlike warmth. "She wants me to play with them. They don't have faces anymore. She says they don't need them." As Lily spoke, a faint, brutal giggle echoed her words, a sound that Elara now recognized as the ghost child from the nursery, the one who had cried for her mama. The house was not just making sounds, it was projecting its victims into the present, making them interact with the living. Elara's breath hitched in her throat. Her family was gone, twisted, broken, lost to the house's insidious embrace. A desperate, primal scream tore from her throat, but it was not her own voice that she heard. It was a long, drawn-out wail, like a banshee, followed by the sharp, metallic clang of 1,000 falling swords, then a chorus of high-pitched, almost human-like keening sounds that reverberated through the conservatory, twisting her scream into a symphony of suffering. The house was already claiming her, twisting her very essence into sound. She ran, her movements frantic, spurred by pure, unadulterated terror, now following a desperate, fragmented whisper that seemed to emanate from the floorboards beneath her. Front, door, basement, escape, basement. The voices of the condemned were fighting back, trying to guide her, their collective agony a desperate chorus urging her to flee. She burst through a crumbling archway, guided by the intensifying echoes, into what appeared to be the main section of the basement. It was a vast, cavernous space, impossibly deep, stretching into unseen darkness. The air here was heavy with a palpable sense of despair, a cold, suffocating weight that pressed down on her. In the center of the vast space, a faint, flickering light illuminated a massive, rusted iron door, almost swallowed by the crumbling stone wall. It was the emergency exit, the one promised in the real estate listing, the one she had foolishly dismissed as an unnecessary detail. "Hurry, last chance," the whispers screamed in her head, now overlaid with a new, terrifying sound. A deep, resonant groan that vibrated through the floor, growing louder, more insistent, like the house itself was shifting, contracting, trying to crush her. She lunged for the door, her fingers scrabbling at the rusted latch. It was heavy, ancient, unyielding. She pulled, grunting with effort, her muscles screaming. The house groaned louder, a chorus of creaks and metallic shrieks, as if its very foundations were tearing themselves apart. Then, from the darkness beyond the flickering light, a new sound emerged, slow and deliberate, a rhythmic, dragging scrape, 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 like something impossibly heavy being pulled across stone, growing closer, closer. It was accompanied by a low, guttural growl that resonated in her teeth, a sound of immense, malevolent hunger. "No, escape, you, or ours." The whispers were no longer fragmented, no longer desperate warnings. They were a unified, triumphant roar, a chorus of victorious, spectral voices. The iron door, with a final, torturous groan, seemed to melt into the wall, the stone around it rippling like water, sealing off her only hope. The light flickered and died, plunging the basement into absolute darkness. Elara screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror and despair. But her scream was not her own. It was immediately caught, twisted, elongated, and amplified, echoing back at her as a chorus of tormented wails, a symphony of suffering that vibrated through her very bones. She heard Michael's flat, monotonous hum, now distorted into a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from her own throat. She heard Ethan's ethereal whispers, now twisting into a cacophony of dissonant shrieks and groans that resonated in her ears. She heard Lily's calm, unnerving voice, now merging with the brittle, hollow laughter of the ghost child, weaving through the fabric of the air, becoming one with the faint, rhythmic snip, snip, snip that followed. The darkness consumed her, but the sounds remained. They were no longer external. They were her, her screams, her family's whispers, their last, desperate pleas, all caught, twisted, and replayed, endlessly, merging with the house's eternal chorus of the damned. She was trapped, not just within its walls, but within its very essence. She was a sound, a new echo, forever condemned to emit eternal warnings that would never be heard, never understood, until another family, lured by the morbid fascination of the House of Echoes, stepped inside and became part of the symphony. And her voice, her scream, would be there, a chilling prelude to their own inescapable doom.